IVM.
Please note, the audio quality is not up to our usual standards. We apologize for any inconvenience. Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. Finally returning to the hosting chair, I'm Anirudh Kanisetti. I'm joined today by Pranay, Kotasthane and Shambhavi Naik. Thank you guys so much for the warm welcome. So today we're going to be speaking about something that we've touched upon in quite a few episodes before, specifically India's genetic diversity. And one of our pet peeves, I'm sure you'll recall, is that the conversation around India's genetic diversity is mostly directed towards the question of who we are and where we come from, as opposed to the very real public health crises that India faces because of the lack of identification of rare congenital disorders. Now, we recently found out that India has its own project similar to Israel's Dor Yeshorim, which aims to study the genetic diseases that certain subpopulations might have, which seemed pretty exciting to me when I first saw the idea. But Dr. Shambhavi Naik is here to pour a little cold water on those flames. So, Shambhavi, can you tell us more about this project and broadly what it aims to achieve?
Right. So the project was announced. I started in April this year. It's been 6 months. And recently they actually celebrated the fact that they've completed 1,008 genomes. So this whole genome sequencing of 1,008 Indians done at two institutions. One is IGIB in Delhi and the other is at CCMB in Hyderabad.
Okay.
So the idea behind this is for the 1,008 genomes that they have sequenced, they have given back data to these people on what they call the IndiGen cards. So the cards have clinically actionable data. So they can basically take it to a clinician, show the data, and the clinician can then refer to lifestyle changes to them based on the mutations that they see. For example, if you have a BRCA1 mutation, which increases the risk to breast cancer, then you can have an increased screening program or an early screening program start. So that's the basic idea behind what has happened so far. Other countries also have similar programs. For example, the UK has something known as the 100K genome, where they are trying to look at rare congenital diseases and mutations that cause these. What the UK did was that they took 70,000 patients of rare diseases and they have sequenced the 100,000 genomes out of that. So the people already have rare diseases, and then you are looking at their DNA to find out where the mutations are. In India's case, what has happened so far is that the 1,008 people sequenced are more or less volunteers. So there was a call given to volunteers. If you go on the IndiGen website, the call is still there. So you can actually register your name to send in a blood sample. So we still don't know how this all will play out in terms of the broader database that they need to create for rare diseases. The stated objective behind the project is, one, to look at rare diseases in Indian subpopulations. So that's the idea behind the IndiGen project.
Can I understand this better? So there are these gene therapies available in any clinic in Bangalore, for example, right? They'll have an advertisement that you can do. How is this different, IndiGen? Second thing, I thought you can do an analysis of whether some diseases relate to some genes if you have a big data set, right? So that you have compiled at these sort of genes map to this sort of population, and a change in them can indicate a disease. So for that, 1,008 samples are too low, isn't it?
Yes. So I'll answer your first question, right? So gene therapy usually works when you know of a particular genetic disorder, you know the mutation that causes the disorder, and then you can actually give a gene therapy. In India, only hematopoietic gene therapies are actually allowed currently. Everything else is still under scientific research and testing. Okay, so that is a therapy to change the genetic mutation, or at least the expression of that mutation. The idea of the IndiGen project is to figure out, for diseases where we do not know what the mutation is, what could that be?
Okay.
So if you look at a big data set, if suppose there are 100 people which suffer from a disease, and those 100 people have similar underlying mutations, then you can have a start to figure out, okay, does this mutation actually cause the disease? Then you can go to the lab and you can do experiments in animal models or even human cell lines and things like that to figure out the causality. But that basically puts you in the ballpark range of what possible underlying causes there might be for that disease.
So this is to create that data set which will help us link diseases to genes for more of them, right? Like currently, than what is currently possible, right?
Yes, yes. So for example, DOR Yeshorim, which Anirudh mentioned at the beginning, right? What they do as an organization is that they offer testing. So they have a panel of diseases that are very common among their target population. So 8 to 10 diseases panel. And they will sequence only those mutations are present in a person or not. The way they do this is that they take DNA sample from teenagers. They do not take any other information like name or any person information. They just take the DNA sample and give an ID code. And then they sequence it. They don't even give the sequence information. They don't even tell the person whether they have a risk to the congenital disease, whether or anything like that. What they do is when that person is set to marry somebody else from the same community, they will ask both of the codes and they will just tell you whether it's a match or a no match. A match means that they are compatible, that when they marry and have children, the children do not have a risk of developing a congenital disease. Right? No matches, which means that basically they both have some similar genetic defect, which means that the child might actually also suffer from an actual genetic disease. Right? So that's the way DOR Yeshorim works. We do not know in our subpopulations what panel of disease to even look at.
Exactly.
So the idea behind this project is to figure out that panel of diseases.
So you mentioned that 1,008 people have actually gone out and volunteered so far and given their information to this. While DOR Yeshorim actually does a very, very good job of anonymizing patient information and focusing exclusively on building that disease panel, do you see IndiGen also doing something similar as well? Do they have similar kind of protocols in terms of privacy? Because the way I'm thinking about this, right, especially in a society that's very, very interested in your lineage, as it were, to use a polite term, potentially not, if you have a genetic disease, if that information is not kept perfectly private, it could affect you down the line, not just in terms of marriage prospects, also employment prospects, health insurance. It could potentially have immense economic costs if it's not done properly from the outset. So what is your prognosis? Do you see those protocols being built in right now?
So at this point of time, not a lot of information is publicly available about the way the project is being run. From what we understand, they want to target a huge number of people. So this is just the start. Right? The 1,008 is just the start to show that we have the capacity to actually go ahead and do this kind of genomics. How that data is being dealt with, what data is being collected. So in addition to just name, it is likely because they want to look at subpopulation level, they might be looking at caste or community details as well. How that is stored, how that is linked is not very transparent, and how that will be used also is not sufficiently clear. So one of the things about a database of this structure, rather of this scale, is that there will be a huge amount of information that every single genome will give you, and to fully utilize it, it is better for it to be public in at least some form, at least just the genomic data, de-identified from all the other variants, because we do not have the capacity to actually go through the entire database to figure out, we can't leave it to one laboratory or two laboratories to go through the entire database and figure out what mutations causes what disease, or how we can best use it. Also, if we wait, the way research lab typically work is that they will come out with publications. They are not looking for a commercial output, right? So if they find a link between a mutation and a disease, then they submit that paper to somebody, then they'll ask for more experiments. It typically takes 1 to 1.5 years to actually publish the data out, after which companies might actually think about, okay, let us create a diagnostic tool for that, let us think of a treatment for that. You're just introducing delays in that pathway, right? And this is all publicly funded research. On the other hand, if it was just publicly available, since this is a publicly funded research, at least the genomic data, then perhaps other companies can then use it in a way. We can obviously set up parameters on who has access to that data, whether they should pay back the government something for all the money that has been spent. Every whole genome sequence costs about 1 lakh rupees. So perhaps if companies are going to make money out of that data, they should probably pay something back. And all of those things need to be thought about right at the front. If the database is currently housed in an academic institution, how do we go about it? Because academic institutions usually do not make money. Should there be a Section 25 company that houses the data, that manages who has access and all of that, whether that makes sense or not? There are a lot of things to think about, which are not clearly addressed at this point of time. Some of the key scientists who are involved in the IndiGen project are also involved in something known as the Guardian Initiative, which basically looks at rare diseases, people with rare diseases, and does genome sequencing for them. So how that data will be used and integrated into the IndiGen project. There are other institutions which already have gathered a lot of data on a different set of diseases. Will that get integrated as well into the IndiGen project? Because finally, most of this is publicly funded research. Are we just duplicating efforts? Are we making the best of it? There are a whole lot of questions that surround IndiGen that are not being discussed.
Actually, I'll disagree with both of you. It's not necessary for some of these questions to first be solved and only then this process to be started. The reason I say this is because the objective of all this is the huge disease burden that India has, and it is clearly linked to genetics because of caste endogamy, right? So that is the priority to solve. Of course, there are lots of these really important questions that you mentioned, but these are unanswered across the world. Like privacy is a question, it's unanswered. I don't think we've come to a right answer on that. So if we want that to get solved before starting this, we are just delaying the main goal of finding the link to disease burden. So I think it's okay to start and then figure some things out. And even the long-term consequences which you're telling about insurance, etc., all are valid concerns, but they can be figured out as this gets started, right?
Yeah, but they need to be figured out.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it will be useful for the listeners. The reason why this is very important is this idea that because of caste endogamy, there are a lot of diseases which are linked to genetics, right? And there's a very interesting book which David Reich had written, right? And the book spoke about what has resulted because of caste endogamy. And it says that Indians have never truly been a large population like the Han Chinese. Okay, it's a single large population. There has been admixture in that group. But in India, instead, India is composed of a large number of small populations. This is a key idea, right? Because of caste endogamy, people have married within the groups, which means if there have been some problems in the genes, they have continued within that group and have been passed from generation to generation, making them more likely to carry those diseases through the generation, which doesn't happen if you don't have endogamy, right? So that's why this is a very high priority thing for us. And maybe diabetes and all these might be linked to some of these. We don't know that, right?
So I'll give you the example of that Dr. Thangaraj had shared with us in an earlier podcast about the Vaishya community in Andhra Pradesh. They're not able to degrade a molecule that is present in anesthesia.
So they don't wake up once they go under anesthesia.
Because they're not able to degrade that molecule in the body. And after the first couple of incidences of this happening, the doctors quickly realized that there was something about the community. And research was done afterwards to figure out that they did not have this one enzyme that actually could degrade it. And now every time a person of that community comes to the OT, doctors know that they should give some other type of anesthesia. So
really scary, right? I mean, anesthesia can just kill you.
Yeah.
So you go to sleep and you never wake up.
So the idea is to find similar kind of conditions across communities. And one of the things about this is that diseases might be rare across the population of India, but they might not be rare at the subpopulation level. So if we look at it from that context, this makes the study really, really important because it helps us achieve health at the subpopulation level itself.
So coming back to the 1,008 people who volunteered, right? So right now, the protocol is that people actually who know about genetic disease, who might know that they have some predisposition towards it, might be inclined to actually volunteer their genome for this.
So from what I've heard, the volunteers are healthy. So it's not even like you have some predisposition or something like that. The volunteers are currently healthy.
So
it was actually a network of scientists who started.
Yeah, this is just for creating the data set, right?
That is my question. So how do you correct for selection bias in terms of the people who end up coming forward and contributing there? So do you, for example, legally oblige this project to collect samples from every subpopulation? Because if you just say voluntarily come and give it to us, not every community is going to be going to have the time on a weekday to go and give their DNA for this kind of thing, right? So how do you address the broader question of bringing these benefits to every possible subpopulation?
So about last year, actually, our colleague Pawan and I, we had actually suggested something on the lines of this project. And we had written a proposal, and we had suggested that for every subpopulation, you identify at least 100 people who have to be included into your database. And then you do it subpopulation wise.
And how many subpopulations do we have? Around 4,000 or 2,000?
No, 273.
That's all? Okay. 273. So you will have 273 into 200 per. Okay.
And preferably 200, but we had suggested 100 as a starting point to see how many, I
mean, that's not even that big a number for the government, isn't it?
It should be doable. So, for example, the UK, I mean, last week, they tweeted out that they want to sequence every baby who's born in the UK.
Wow.
That's the healthcare. Because this is going to be the healthcare standard. People are going to look at what mutation what causes what disease, and then we either change the mutation or you introduce some lifestyle change so that you reduce your risk of disease.
Okay, so I think just to sum up the conversation we've had so far, this new project that we've started is definitely the right step forward in terms of solving India's public health burden. There are a lot of things we have to think about, especially from like an ecosystem perspective, right? So how do you enable companies to make use of this data? How do you charge equitably, especially considering this is a publicly funded project? So there are a lot of questions that remain to be asked, but I think overall we agree that this had to be done eventually.
Yeah, this is a great step, I think. And from my concerns about raising these questions is that the program has to be protected in a certain manner so that it doesn't derail out. If there's a lack of funding at some point of time or something like that happens, because this is a commercially viable project. Whether it gets sequestered by academic thinking or something like that, it might derail that project. So we need to take it out of that. The other issue that actually happened in the US last week was that one of the state governments, I think state government of Florida, sent an order that the US police can use civilian databases to do forensic searching. This was a case of a serial rapist that they're looking at. So they have the DNA of the rapist and they ran it through their own DNA database. The forensic DNA database could not find anything. So they petitioned the court to actually use civilian databases. And the court has now allowed them. We expect that 23andMe and Ancestry.com, which are the two databases available, to challenge the order. But suppose we all give our genes, our DNA to the IndiGen project, and tomorrow something similar happens in India. How would that impact IndiGen? Would it stop people from actually giving their DNA and figuring out issues with their genes because they are afraid that at some point of time it can be used against them as well, right? So there are lots of things to think about. I mean, that's the cool thing about emerging technologies, right? They bring a lot of benefit, but it also raises a lot of questions that we have to think about.
Especially, I think the most basic question that we haven't come to at this point is communication, because this isn't the first brilliant publicly funded science project to take off in India. And there have been so many that end up getting derailed because of some or the other political reason. And it would be a tragedy if that were to happen to this as well, for the simple reason that we're not able to build credible institutions around it from the get-go.
From the solution that you and Pawan had written last time, what are some of the things there that you would want to see in a project like this?
So,
first thing you mentioned, across subpopulations, take 100 samples of each of those subpopulations, right? So you have an exhaustive database. Right. Anything else?
The second thing was to make the genomic data publicly available. So no personal information, make the genomic data publicly available.
Why?
Because the government by itself cannot make a lot of... So like the research academicians cannot make a lot of the commercial solutions, right? The diagnostics, the therapeutics, etc. You can get the publications and all that. That's okay.
So basically what you're saying is, if this data set of linking genetic mutations to particular diseases, if this database is available to many companies, basically subpopulation, not individual level, they'll be able to make more products based on it. Someone might focus on diabetes, someone else might focus on, like this anesthesia type of disease which we talked about. So you want to...
Just because we have a public health crisis now, we need to expedite the solutions that come out of it, right? The other thing that we had suggested was that there are a lot of diseases that the government might not be interested in, right? So there are some lethal diseases that, from a public health point of view, make sense for the government to actually intervene and, say, create a panel themselves or create vaccinations for it themselves or something like that. But there are a variety of lifestyle diseases, balding, for example. Right? The government should not be involved, given our staff resources, might not want to be involved in finding balding-related issues. So from that point of view, we had actually proposed a kind of a framework that the government could use to prioritize diseases. And then those diseases might have been sent to research academicians or to companies that they like, and the rest is all open. So people can come and create solutions as they want. And the last thing I think which is very important, which is missing at the moment, is genetic counselors. So for example, even with the IndiGen card, they say that you have to go to a clinician to actually use it. But currently, not a lot of clinicians are actually trained on how to look at genetic data, make interpretations. So they can say BRCA1 causes a predisposition to breast cancer, right? This was made famous by Angelina Jolie a few years ago when she had her mastectomy because she had BRCA1 mutation. But she also had a lot of other mutations that put her risk at 87%. Not everyone who has a BRCA mutation actually has that higher risk. So not everyone has to do mastectomy. That level of appreciation of genetic data has to be taught. People have to be trained for it. So we actually wanted that capacity training program as well to be a part of the initiative.
This is something that public health officials need to be trained in.
The clinicians who are looking at the data.
Not necessarily public.
So both private and public.
Yeah. If you want to advise based on genetic data, you need to appreciate what that genetic data means.
This is a bit of a tangent actually, but it reminds me of a talk I attended at the ORF Sci-Fi a little while ago, where somebody was talking about how they gave out tablets to health workers at a village on block level, people who were generally midwives, for example, and because they had access to this cool-looking tablet that enabled them to type in the symptoms and then bring in diagnoses that might actually support what they already know from their own experience, they found that the social capital attached to that job suddenly increased because it turned into a white-collar job, because you're working with technology all of a sudden. And I'm thinking that this sort of thing where you have these new technologies that could potentially have aspirational value, that could potentially look cool if communicated the right way, if properly disseminated, we could unlock huge public health benefits.
Yeah. But at the same time, there are a bit of risk. So the reason why DOR Yeshorim does not give out the health data at any point of time is because they believe that there is a certain risk to knowing that you might have a mutation, even though you're not impacted by it at all. Does the knowledge that I might get it at some point of time, even if you are not going to get it, that in itself can really negatively impact the way you live, and which is why they do not give out health information.
Well, all of us Indians know we're dying of lung cancer. That doesn't seem to have changed our behavior in any way. That's just a dark joke. Do we have any further questions?
Yeah, so just one last point. This IndiGen's idea of giving them this card and they can go to a clinician, that is meant as an incentive for people to come forward, is it? Because if the aim is to create database, then you don't need to give a card, right? You just need to create a database, and later on, for some other person, if you go to a doctor, they should be able to compare what predispositions you have, right?
So in the proposal that Pawan and I had made, we had never said about giving genomic data back to the person. Mostly because of this. Mostly because we do not have the training to understand what that data means, and it might actually cause people to make massive lifestyle changes without really requiring them. So I think it's an incentive basis. I think they decided to give it as an incentive basis. Then they figured out that if they gave the whole genome, then that could have more consequences. So they are just giving certain mutations that are publicly known to cause disease. And then they put in a rider of saying that you go to a clinician, and the clinician will tell you what the data means. I find the whole cycle, I'm a little skeptical about the whole cycle, because if you go to a clinician and say, like, look, this is my IndiGen data and please tell me if there are any issues. As a clinician, I would feel, okay, this person is already sold on the idea that genetics causes diseases. I can just, if I was a unscrupulous doctor, I could just say, you have to do these 10 things because your genes say these things, right? I'm a little skeptical about the idea of just giving out these mutations without that context or training.
Great. So this is an area to keep watch.
It is going to be very interesting, and I hope that there will be more transparent policies coming in to enable the project as well as restrict what that data gets.
So we look forward to writing from you on this.
Yeah, and please follow Shambhavi at the Naik Mike on Twitter for the latest updates on science, tech policy, and especially of DNA, which is something that India really needs to think about. On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Shambhavi. Thank you for joining me, Pranay. And thank you so much for listening to All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
The modern world is obsessed with food and agriculture. Everywhere you look, new and exciting technologies are bringing food innovation to your street market, your grocery store, your doorstep, and your plate. From our quest for the perfect food photos to our rediscovery of ancient grains. Quite simply, food has never been sexier. But guess what? The modern food system is broken. It's a major cause of climate change, antibiotic resistance, and global poverty. So how did we get here, and where are we going? Most importantly, how are we going to feed 10 billion people globally by the year 2050 through better, more sustainable means? I'm Varun Deshpande.
And I'm Ramya Ramurthy. And we work for the Good Food Institute, a global non-profit accelerating the transformation to a more healthy, sustainable, and just food system. The next food revolution is here. On Feeding 10 Billion, we're giving you the inside view. You can tune into us every Tuesday on the IVM Podcast app or ivmpodcast.com or wherever you get your podcasts from.
Look! Up in the internet! It's a meme! No! It's a cat video! No! It's the Geek Fruit Podcast!
That's right, we interrupt this riveting broadcast to tell you about our show, the Geek Fruit Podcast, where Tejas, Dinkar, and I, Jishnu, talk about everything in pop culture, including DC, Marvel, Star Wars, Netflix, and everything in between.
You know how your friends hate it when you ramble about some nerdy crap and you just want somebody to listen to you? Well, sorry, there's nothing we can do about that, but come listen to us ramble and it'll almost be like the real thing. Kind of.
Listen to new episodes of the Geek Fruit Podcast every Monday and the Geek Fruit Bulletin every Thursday on iTunes, Google Podcasts, the IVM app, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Happy listening, you nerds.